All right. Hi, everyone. So today we have the great fortune to have Dr. Eric Crosby come to talk to us about his work in a pilot randomized controlled trial of Sleep Scholar, which is a single session internet-based insomnia intervention for college students with a history of suicide ideation. So Dr. Crosby graduated from the University of Maryland-Baltimore with a master's in social work in 2015 from the Auburn University with a PhD in clinical psychology in 2023. He is currently completing an NIMH-funded T32 postdoctoral fellowship in implementation science for mental health under the mentorship of Dr. David Mandell and Dr. Shari Jager-Hyman at the Penn Center for Mental Health. He is interested in developing scalable evidence-based suicide preventions, and his research, which has been funded by the Military Suicide Research Consortium, focuses on digital cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBT-I, as low-stigma intervention to reduce suicidality. So I'll let you take it away, Eric. Thank you.
So thanks for having me. So there's not an echo or anything. Yeah, thanks for having me. Sorry about the audio difficulties. My name is Eric Crosby, and I'm here to talk to you about Sleep Scholar today. So yeah, this work has been supported by the Military Suicide Research Consortium, and just like to say up front that the opinions and interpretations aren't endorsed by the MSRC or the Department of Defense. All right. So college-age adults have the highest rate of suicide ideation compared to any other age group. And these rates have only increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. But only half of college students with suicide ideation receive mental health treatment due to the time, finances, and stigma and other barriers associated with traditional mental health treatment. But cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBT-I, is a promising intervention to reduce their suicide ideation. And this is because insomnia symptoms are pretty common among college students. Insomnia symptoms are a risk factor for suicide ideation, and insomnia is a unidirectional risk factor for suicide ideation. So it's insomnia that predicts suicide ideation and not the reverse suicide ideation predicting insomnia. And insomnia treatment like CBT-I improves suicide ideation and other mental health symptoms. So cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBT-I, is an evidence-based treatment that improves sleep quality and sleep quantity. And there are several adaptations to traditional CBT-I that's face-to-face. Two main forms of these adaptations are self-guided internet-based CBT-I and brief face-to-face CBT-I. But these are limited because they require a time-intensive process, financial resources, or a specific time and location to complete the intervention with a trained professional. Also, CBT-I is not typically tailored to the unique experiences of sleep that college students have compared to older adults. So to fill this gap, I created Sleep Scholar. It's a CBT-I intervention that combines the accessibility of a self-guided internet-based intervention and a brief intervention to create a single session self-guided internet-based intervention tailored to the needs of college students. And I've conducted 2 studies to evaluate Sleep Scholar. I'm going to talk about both of them today. The first one was a pilot study testing the feasibility and acceptability of the intervention. And then the second one, the main one, was a randomized controlled trial of the intervention. But first, let's talk about insomnia and what is insomnia. A lot of people have different opinions or different perceptions of what insomnia is. Before 2013, insomnia was largely considered a secondary disorder of other mental health symptoms, so of anxiety and depression. But with the DSM-5, it got recognized as a primary disorder that is not simply secondary to another mental health disorder. So we have primary insomnia and insomnia disorder. And what insomnia disorder is characterizes as is difficulty or dissatisfaction with quality and quantity of sleep that's associated with difficulty initiating sleep, maintaining sleep. And this could be multiple awakenings for a short duration or one large awakening for a long duration. And then early morning awakenings without the ability to return to sleep. And these symptoms have to occur 3 times a week for 3 months. And you have to have adequate opportunity to sleep. So important part of this is not just like a one night, one off, or a one weekend thing, um, or after a stressful event. And it's not just for if you have to have the adequate opportunity to sleep. So if you had a test or something like that, or a death in the family, and you were busy taking care of things, doesn't really qualify as insomnia. But if you have the opportunity and couldn't sleep at that, and it fits all these other criteria, that would meet insomnia disorder. And then I wanted to understand the sleep challenges of college students. And through the literature, I found out that it's their lifestyle that may contribute to their insomnia symptoms, and these unique lifestyle that is different from older adults that may increase the prevalence of insomnia symptoms. So for college students, they have a lot of stressors. So one main stressor is a new environment. They may be moving to a college campus, they may be moving away from home, they may have noisy roommates and neighbors, maybe not be able to control the bedroom temperature if they're living in a dorm room or something like that. They also have interpersonal stressors. They're making new friends, leaving their old friends from high school, they may be moving to a place where there's no social support at all, and they're quite alone, out of state or something like that. Maybe building romantic relationships as well, establishing for the first time having a girlfriend or boyfriend, or maybe setting up for marriage or things like that. And of course, increased academic workload on top of this, having to deal with multiple different classes and mostly on their own, which may be different from high school. So increased amount of stress. And we all know when we have increased stresses in our life, we are more likely to have insomnia symptoms or difficulty sleeping in some way, shape, or form. College-age adults also use more electronics devices than older adults. So this includes cell phones, laptops, video games. This may be a part of their regular lifestyle. Regularly using a cell phone to communicate with others, video games to have fun, or play video games with other people, or they may just be using their laptop or electronic devices for homework, and it's a natural part of their life. It may become difficult when you are doing homework and things like that, and you have to do it to the last minute right before you go to sleep, which makes it more difficult to go to sleep. There's also increased substance use, so alcohol use and stimulants like Adderall, coffee to study and socialize with friends, and these are more common in younger adults than older adults, to make it more difficult to sleep. And then lastly, this culminates to inconsistent sleep patterns. There's a greater discrepancy between weekday and weekend sleep patterns for college age adults compared to older age adults. And you can imagine this might be staying up late for all-nighters on the weekend, or staying up to socialize or attend social events or things like that. And this is a large discrepancy in weekday and weekday patterns, which is kind of hard when consistency in sleep patterns improves insomnia symptoms. It makes it more difficult for them. So then I wanted to address this. I wanted to create a sleep scholar intervention, or a sleep intervention that address all these difficulties. So I moved on to this, and Sleep Scholar contains 3 text-based modules that were adapted from face-to-face CBT-I protocols. The first sleep module is called Sleep Education. And basically the purpose of this sleep module, or the purpose of this module, is to describe how insomnia is developed and maintained over time. And this is based on the 3P model of insomnia, which talks about predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating factors of insomnia. So predisposing meaning you may have a biological risk or a higher risk before even developing insomnia symptoms. So you may be or have hyperarousal, or you may be a night owl, and most of the world operates on like a morning day schedule or things like that. So you may be predisposed. You may have precipitating events like stressful life events, that big test, a new relationship, a death in the family or something like that. And then perpetuating factors. And these are the main targets of CBT-I, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And these are behaviors and cognitions that maintain insomnia symptoms. And these are mostly related to excessive time in bed and thoughts that increase your likelihood of being in bed when you don't need to be. And we'll get into a little more of these. This first module also went over the two-process module of sleep, or the two-process model of sleep, which is basically just how sleep is regulated. Talks about sleep drive and circadian. Sleep drive is similar to hunger drive, where the longer you are not sleeping, the more sleepy you are, and then as you sleep, the less sleep you are. In the same way, the longer you go without eating, the more hungry you are, and then as you eat, the less hungry you are. And for circadian rhythm, it's just like our body operates on a 24, 25-hour schedule. So our body knows generally to be when to be awake and when to sleep. And if you're doing it on opposite schedule, it's going to become more difficult. We also talked about in this module individual differences in sleep from adolescence to adulthood, mostly talking about sleep duration, how it changes and decreases over time over our life course. And then also these lifestyle and environmental factors like substance use, electronic devices, and roommates. The second module of the Sleep Scholar intervention was initiating sleep. It's based off of stimulus control therapy. And it teaches strategies to better connect the bed with sleep, and does this by telling the participant to only be in bed when they are sleepy. So the bed is not a cue for other activities besides sleep. You want to decrease this conditioned arousal that the bed is a place to study or hang out or play video games. So what we did, we asked participants to only use the bed for sleep, not for homework, video games, hanging out, or anything like that. And to get out of bed if you're having difficulty sleeping. So after 15 minutes or putting effort into sleep, leave that room and go do a nice, calming, relaxing activity. And then to keep a consistent wake time and avoid daytime napping to promote that circadian rhythm and sleep drive that I talked about, and that is presented in the previous model, such as sleep education. And then the last module is the enhancing sleep quality module, which is based on sleep restriction therapy. And what this module does is creates a time in bed schedule to reduce inconsistent sleep patterns. And it removes excessive time in bed by telling participant they can only be in bed the amount of time that they were sleeping before the intervention. So if you're in bed 9 hours, but you're only sleeping 8 hours of that intervention, if you're in bed 9 hours, but you're only sleeping 8 hours at that time, you can only be in bed 8 hours after the intervention. And this typically increases participants' sleep drive or their drive for sleep because it involves staying up much later to match that pre-treatment total sleep time. And then participants adjust their time in bed to get better duration or better quality of sleep, whatever is most important for them at that time. And the intervention also includes some interactivity like animation graphics and a quiz after each module to test participants' understanding of the information, like the animation presented in front of you. And the animation kind of presents the stimulus control and sleep restriction, where this person's bed from 12 to 9, but they're only sleeping about 8 to 7 or so, 1 to 8, 1 a.m. to 8 a.m. So you move that bedtime later and remove all these other things like the frustration of being awake and being on the phone, so they can just sleep that total time period. So for the first study of Sleep Scholar, to test the feasibility and acceptability of the intervention, I recruited 38 college students with insomnia symptoms and a lifetime history of suicide ideation. And then they completed pre-treatment sleep diaries, daily sleep diaries, and surveys. And then participants came into the lab to complete the Sleep Scholar intervention, and they were provided all the information that I just went over. And then after the intervention, they were prescribed a sleep schedule where they can only be in bed that certain period of time that matched their pre-treatment total sleep time. After the intervention, they received text messages to complete 7 daily sleep diaries in the week before, the 1 week, and the 1 month follow-up. And then during those follow-ups, they received guidance about how to adjust their time in bed schedule in the next week to get either better quality or better duration of sleep. The results showed that participants understood the majority of the information that was presented in Sleep Scholar. They scored 85% out of 100%, 70 out of 20 questions correct, 17 out of 20 questions correct. They also found it pretty acceptable as a treatment for insomnia. The acceptability score was 76 out of 100. And they're also pretty satisfied with the intervention. The satisfaction score was 28 out of 32. There was also large effects from pre-treatment to both the 1 week and the 1 month follow-up for insomnia, depression, anxiety, and PTSD symptoms. So we all saw there's a decrease for everyone in these mental health symptoms across the course of the study. However, there was some difficulty calculating and implementing time in bed schedule for participants, especially when they were studying, pulling all-nighters or things like that, or attending social events on the weekends. So they had trouble implementing and calculating their time in bed schedule, effectively. And this may be why almost half of participants were lost during the follow-up period, and adherence decreased by a third during the same time. So just limited support during that time. Also, in that initial feasibility and acceptability trial of Sleep Scholar, I did not examine the efficacy. It was an uncontrolled trial, so we don't know how it compares to a control group. But I published the findings and I began to work on the development of the intervention to test it in a randomized controlled trial. So let's talk about these developments that went into this. So based on the pilot of Sleep Scholar, changes were made to both the intervention and to the protocol. First, I simplified and reduced psychological jargon. So like, for example, stimulus control therapy was not, I changed that to initiating sleep to the initiating sleep module to better characterize the purpose of the intervention or the purpose of the module and not confuse people with different psychological jargon like stimulus control. Also made the content more, tried to make the content more understandable. So instead of describing it as stimulus control strategies, described it as strategies to strengthen the connection between the bed and sleep, because that's the purpose of the strategy. Also added a flow chart to make it a little bit easier for participants to understand how to adjust the time of bed schedule. I also wanted to add some support for complex behaviors. So in that feasibility acceptability trial, participants completed daily sleep diaries in a week before each follow-up and had to independently adjust their time in bed schedule. And they only received an email after the intervention with select solutions to barriers that they said they might have encountered after the intervention. But in the randomized controlled trial, participants completed daily sleep diaries for the entire month after the intervention while they were implementing the strategies. And their time in bed recommendations for each week was calculated and presented to them. So it was the intervention was fully automated. And there was also a website of all the different barriers and solutions that people had come across and possible solutions to resolve those. And participants provided access to this website so they could be ready for anything that they encountered after the intervention. And this also included newly added solutions for studying, attending social events, vacations, spring break, and things like that. I also wanted participants to reflect on how they will implement these strategies. So in that feasibility acceptability trial, I only provided potential solutions to possible barriers that they might encounter. But in the current randomized control trial, participants were asked to come up with their own potential solutions for difficult strategies. So there was open-ended text boxes after the strategies that were presented, and participants came up with an action plan about how they would implement the strategies, what they had to do, different rooms to go to, different activities they could complete while they're out of bed and things like that. In addition, I wanted to increase engagement and reduce attrition. So in that initial pilot, participants were sent generic text message reminders about what they had to do. But in the current randomized control trial, participants were explicitly told what they had to do, and included lost frame reminders. So they were told what they had to do, what they lost by not doing it, and when they had to complete it by to increase the engagement with the intervention and the protocol. Also wanted to increase the access and portability of the intervention. Um, so text message reminders in that first trial was sent at an arbitrary time, and participants had to complete the intervention inside the lab. But in the current randomized control trial, text message reminders were sent based on the sleep schedule of participants in that initial feasibility trial, and participants complete the intervention on their personal electronic devices at any place. So on their smartphone, on the bus, or wherever they chose to be. So in the current study, I used the randomized controlled design to examine the efficacy of the sleep scholar intervention. I recruited college students with at least subclinical insomnia symptoms from social media flyers in the university research system. I excluded students who worked overnight and had other untreated sleep disorders. And then they completed a week of pretreatment sleep diaries and then a pretreatment assessment of insomnia, suicide ideation, and other mental health conditions. And then they were randomized into Sleep Scholar or Building Healthy Habits, which was the control condition. As I mentioned before, Sleep Scholar contained 3 text-based modules that were adapted from face-to-face CBT-I protocols. And then Building Healthy Habits was another single session self-guided digital intervention. It contained 2 modules that were related to healthy movement and healthy eating. It just asked participants to reflect on their current movement and eating habits, and then provided some recommendations about how to improve those. After participants completed the intervention, they immediately completed the post-treatment assessment of acceptability and satisfaction. And then during the follow-up period, they receive a reminder email, the intervention strategies that had the website, had a link to a website of all the information, all the key strategies from the intervention. And then they began completing daily sleep diaries for the next 4 weeks. And then at the end of each week of daily sleep diaries, sleep patterns were automatically averaged and participants received individualized feedback on their sleep patterns. However, only participants in Sleep Scholar received feedback on their time in bed schedule and were prescribed a time in bed schedule and how to adjust it to improve their sleep quality or sleep quantity. Then participants completed a 1 week and a 1 month follow-up assessment of insomnia, suicidation, and other mental health measures, and they were compensated financially or with research credits. So first, I expected Sleep Scholar to improve sleep symptoms over time and compared to the control condition. This was measured with the Insomnia Severity Index to measure insomnia, Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, which measures sleep quality, dysfunctional beliefs about sleep, which measure those negative beliefs about sleep that the sleep education module addressed. And this was mostly handled with a multi-level linear mixed model using a 2x3 format, which 2 conditioned by 3 time point, the pre-treatment, 1 week and 1 month follow-up. But for the sleep diary outcomes, it was the 2 conditions, Sleep Scholar and the control group, and then there was 5 weeks of sleep diaries, 1 pre-treatment and then 4 weeks after each intervention. I mean, for that, the average of each week after the intervention for 4 weeks. I also expected Sleep Scholar to improve mental health outcomes over time and compared to control condition with suicide ideation, depression, anxiety, and PTSD symptoms. The third, tertiary outcomes were related to adherence, acceptability, and satisfaction. I also expected Sleep Scholar to improve adherence, acceptability, and satisfaction over time and compared to the control condition. And I also examined clinically significant changes in insomnia, which was operationalized as reduction of 7 points or greater on the insomnia severity index. All these analyses were completed on intent to treat analysis. So all participants who were randomized were included in the final analysis, and this was examined in M+ using full information maximum likelihood. We had 61 participants, about half and half within the two conditions, mostly female, non-Hispanic, white, heterosexual, and they slept off campus. A large minority of participants were first-year college students, and about a third of participants had suicide ideation in the past 2 weeks. The results showed that participants scored moderately well on the Sleep Scholar quizzes that were after each module, indicating they understood the majority of information that was presented to them. You can see the overall percentage is 77%, but that varied by each module, with the sleep education module being the best and the enhancing sleep quality module being the worst. For the most part, participants completed the intervention on their mobile device, 75, the large majority on a mobile device. I mean, it took only about 30 minutes to complete the intervention. But if you use a desktop computer, that 25%, they were associated with a greater duration of time to complete the intervention. And less than a third of participants accessed that website that had the intervention strategies after the single intervention session. Yeah. So the majority only stuck to that single session and didn't go to additional information afterwards. For the primary sleep outcomes, I found that across conditions, most sleep outcomes significantly decreased over time, but the condition by time effect was not significant, showing that the rate of decrease over time did not differ between two conditions, indicating that Sleep Scholar was not effective and did not improve sleep outcomes compared to the control condition. For the secondary mental health outcomes, there's a similar pattern of results where across conditions, most symptoms significantly decreased over time. But for adherence, most did not change over time, and both for adherence and mental health outcomes, the condition by time effect showed that the rate of decrease over time did not differ between conditions, and Sleep Scholar wasn't effective for mental health or adherence outcomes compared to the control condition. I also analyzed acceptability and satisfaction. And you can see at post-treatment, Sleep Scholar was significantly more acceptable as an insomnia treatment compared to the control condition. And participants in Sleep Scholar had significantly greater satisfaction compared to the control condition. However, at the 1-month follow-up, satisfaction didn't differ between the two conditions. And also examined the clinically significant reductions in insomnia severity. So again, this is a 7-point reduction in insomnia severity or greater. And although participants in Sleep Scholar had greater reductions and or greater clinically significant reductions in insomnia severity compared to control conditions, this was not statistically significant. So although Sleep Scholar was not more effective than control conditions for the study, it showed that college students were approved and satisfied with this type of intervention, essentially tailored CBT-I strategies in this brief self-guided digital format. And this is just a proof of concept showing that Sleep Scholar is feasible and acceptable. It has some value among college students, but changes need to be made before it's disseminated and disseminated to a large population of college students. So some of the limitations of the study was that I was initially powered for medium effects based on the pilot study, But most effects on suicidal outcomes produce small effects, and also a self-guided brief intervention is going to be more associated with small effects. Um, so this should be planned for in the future study to be adequately powered for smaller effects. Another large limitation of this type of intervention, a brief self-guided digital intervention, is insufficient tailoring. Typically, when participants want this type of intervention, they want it to mimic as much as possible the face-to-face interaction that they would have. And one part of that is key is personalized goal setting and assessment. When you go to face-to-face clinician for CBT-I or most type of mental health treatment, there's a comprehensive assessment that is taking place. There's an intake, and then they personalize the information based on that intake to you and how to resolve the difficulty that you're having. But in our study, we didn't personalize, for example, the 3P model of insomnia. What are your predisposing factors? What are your precipitating factors? And what are your maintaining factors? We didn't tell them what circadian rhythm that they have. Are they a morning person or an evening person? How that relates to their treatment strategies. And we presented all of them. We presented all the treatment strategies and didn't tell them which treatment strategies was better for them. And it's going to be more long lasting for them. So overall, yeah, there's some limitations of the personalized goal setting and assessment. There was also limited support during the intervention and during the follow-up period compared to face-to-face interventions. So face-to-face, there's the two-way communication. You're talking back and forth with a provider. They also may use tools to increase engagement, like worksheets or videos or role plays during the intervention. And that becomes harder when you're just dealing with a computer-mediated device, and it's hard to produce that two-way communication there. So that's something that's lacking from this intervention. In the same way in face-to-face, CBT-I, you're going to come back week to week, and you're going to get feedback on your sleep and what's been going on. We gave them feedback on their sleep each week, but one thing that was missing here was the problem solving if people weren't adherent. So if people weren't able to get up at the same time every day, we didn't particularly problem solve how they can do that. We provided some solutions, but it wasn't personalized problem solving for each person. And that's really going to help them move through the different type of strategies. Also, there should be more sufficient tailoring for the mechanisms that contribute to suicide ideation. You can imagine when someone has insomnia symptoms, they experience frustration from not being able to fall asleep. They may feel alone when they wake up in the middle of the night and their partner is sleeping, or everyone around them is asleep and the world is asleep, and you can't have that social support. And they wake up the next day and may have problem-solving difficulties or emotional regulation difficulties just from that lack of sleep. And these are things that should be targeted during this type of treatment as well. And last, there was the fusion of the intervention, because both conditions tracked their sleep patterns, and simply tracking your sleep patterns is going to improve your sleep. That is a main component of most CBT type therapies, is tracking to understand what's going on. But when both groups are tracking, it kind of blunts the contrast between the two conditions. So overall, future steps to improve the efficacy of Sleep Scholar: increase personalized support through a case conceptualization of insomnia. So similar to face-to-face CBT-I, there needs to be a case conceptualization of, oh, these are the best strategies for you to improve your sleep. And this is how we're going to get that done. There also needs to be increased engagement and adherence. So one way to do this is to virtually practice these CBT-I strategies while they're completing the app. That's hard because it's obviously virtual. But one way to do this is, like, if you think of Sims, like Sims has a bunch of tasks that you have to do, and you have to walk with an animated character through that. And participants should be able to practice this type of thing in their own environment, like a dorm room or something like that, to see what difficulties they may run into and how to resolve that. And then they should be provided daily feedback after the intervention about this is what you didn't stick to, and these are some strategies that we could to help improve that adherence. And then lastly, these mechanisms between insomnia and suicide ideation. This might include some problem-solving therapy or some cognitive restructuring to reduce the cognitive deficits and help improve the emotional regulation that's going on with these people. And this can all be accomplished through co-designing some interventions with diverse populations, simply comparing to a wait list to start off with before having an active control condition, and recruiting a larger sample to detect those small effects. That is what I have for you today, and I'm open to any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, for that great presentation. I have a few questions relating to your future directions. So there's always a balance, of course, between trying to present and provide support through an online platform or means, and then also providing enough individualization so that it's meaningful for each individual person. And so you've been thinking through some next steps and how to make it more personalized. I'm wondering if you had considered using like just-in-time support. So there's this new concept that's been around for less than a decade of just-in-time adaptive interventions, where we can use ongoing monitoring of it doesn't necessarily need to be like wearable device monitoring, but monitoring through like EMAs or however, to get a grasp on how the person's feeling throughout the week. So you're not just giving sort of the one-time single session intervention. I know there's some follow-up that you do, but not so personalized, like to kind of adapt it so that it becomes much more individualized and provide more opportunities for that problem solving that you talked about.
Yes, I've definitely thought about that, and that's definitely the direction that I'm heading toward. So collecting like EMA on like alertness, fatigue, or stressful life events, or different daily activities and things like that. So we can kind of predict different modifications that we can make to the strategies to make you to increase adherence, or yeah, just provide different strategies for different people depending on their life circumstances. Yeah, it's definitely gonna. That's definitely the future of these digital, or I see the future of these digital interventions. It is helpful for this type of intervention that is so discrete, because CBT-I is a very discrete treatment. It just becomes more complicated with wider CBT-I strategies, but definitely something that I'm thinking about and considering about how to incorporate.
Great. Okay, I have another question, but I'll let anyone else who has questions jump in.
So I was just reading the chat.
I have a couple questions, and sorry if I missed some of the details at the beginning. So it seems like your intervention, quote unquote, doesn't work compared to the control you picked, which was sort of an active control. You don't have a control that's like gold standard, right? Meaning,
I guess
is it possible that both of them did work? In other words, can you tell whether they both worked less well than a gold standard insomnia treatment would have worked?
I guess symptoms decrease for insomnia, symptoms decrease for both conditions, but typically for healthy movement and healthy eating, they're not gonna. The gold standard is like CBT-I face to face, with like it's 6 sessions or 8 sessions long, and typically healthy movement and healthy eating don't compare as well. They don't have similar effect sizes. It is possible that they both had an effect, but I guess compared to a gold standard, they would have been probably a insignificant and a modest effect compared to like a face-to-face CBT-I that's longer.
Okay. Did they still have bad insomnia at the end?
No, for the most part, I think they ended around like a subclinical insomnia level, around an 8 on the ISI.
Okay. So I'm wondering whether, and did you select for people who had severe insomnia or chronic insomnia, or?
Yeah, so most of these people they only had to have subclinical insomnia, which is about an 8 or so on the insomnia severity index, and I think the mean was about 13. So and it goes up to 28. So the majority of people did not have severe insomnia symptoms. They were more in that subclinical level.
Okay. So it seems to me that maybe one of the issues is that you have a pretty mild group that may just improve spontaneously, which is good for them, but maybe not good for you.
Definitely, yeah, definitely want to recruit a sample that has insomnia disorder rather than the subclinical insomnia symptoms. Insomnia symptoms ebb and flow, as you probably have experienced in your own life. You may have one day or 1 week where it's bad, and then 1 week where it's amazing after. That's why having these people where it's consistent for 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 times a week, we're going to see, I guess, more consistent effects rather than, or we're going to be able to control for the ebb and flow naturally of insomnia symptoms.
And were you able to look at any kind of moderators? Like you mentioned that some people engaged with the website, but not everybody. Like,
unfortunately not. We only had a sample of 61 people, so it was a small sample size and didn't examine moderators.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So you had about a third of the sample that was in the RCT that had suicidal ideation. Did you look at, for those on the call that are interested in that subgroup, did you take a look to see how the results panned out in that group, or if there's any differences in, the rollout of the intervention, or any other key differences to keep in mind?
No, I actually didn't look at that to compare like people with suicide ideation compared without. That's something that, yeah, that could be particularly helpful in the future. Yeah, just to see if, so for the whole overall sample, suicide ideation didn't decrease, but I'm curious, just for the people who had baseline, if it did, and if there were any changes with that. Yeah.
And also, I think, to do with the sleep patterns of that specific group. The intervention obviously wasn't targeting suicide, but if there were changes in that specific group in terms of their sleeping, which could be a protective factor, for other, various things going on in their lives.
Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, that's something that I haven't looked at, but it definitely could be beneficial to look at. There wasn't much changes in like their specific sleep behaviors, so I'm not sure how much an effect would have on the outcome of the sleep measures, but it's something that could be looked at. Yeah.
Maybe pilot data for another grant.
Yes.
Eric, it's really exciting to get to see you talk about your work. And I know we've talked a little bit about this before, but now getting a better understanding of the findings, publications. What do you want to come out of this next? Like, even when I hear you talk about like recruiting clinical samples for additional testing, to what ends? Why should they be involved in your next study instead of using one of the CBT for insomnia applications available on app stores? Or do you want this to be, do you want to help develop new features for mental health services available to students on college campuses? Do you want to, like, what do you want to do with this next? Because it's interesting. And it seems like there's a need that we need to address. And I'm wondering if it stays entirely within the academic setting to grow your evidence base towards some end. And if so, what? But I guess I want to know where are you taking this?
Yeah. So the population of interest is people with suicidality is where I'm heading toward. And a lot of people with suicidality, they don't end up coming to treatment. And for the same reasons that I mentioned before, the finances, logistical part, mistrust of providers type things. So I hope to expand it to people with suicidality to, yeah, to have it more widespread, to reach that disparity there. Yeah. And it's going to take, it's going to take a larger sample. I would like, so one of your questions was why this app compared to other stuff that's already available. So in large, the CBT-I apps that are available or the CBT-I interventions that are available are largely not personalized, or they take an extended period of time to complete. The best interventions out there that are digital are called like Sleepio and Shut-Eye and things like that. And they typically take about 8 weeks to complete, but they're completely self-guided, which is amazing. But that's a long time that someone has to dedicate to treatment. And when you're under distress, like you maybe when you are in a suicidal crisis or even managing suicidal thoughts on a day-to-day basis, it's going to be a lot to go through. On the other hand, this type of intervention could be a shorter way to do that in a more personalized manner. So all the briefer interventions, like there's a large one, Insomnia Coach for the VA, or that's the large one, Insomnia Coach. They're largely unpersonalized. A lot of these digital interventions are unpersonalized. They're just workbooks that we essentially put on a computer. And even if they are a little bit more dynamic, they have animations and graphics and things like that, they're not personalized to the individual. They're not the same experience that one has when they go to a face-to-face meeting. Insomnia Coach, amazing. They have a time in bed recommendation as well. But again, nothing's personalized to you. It's just like you have the sleep. They don't tell you what strategies that you need to complete. They don't tell you how you can make adjustments to these strategies to be more effective at them. They don't tell you if you need support in other areas and how they can refer you to treatment. It's kind of short-sighted. And typically people want more. The people who are not going to treatment are the people who, they want the best, but they simply can't manage it for some way, some shape or form, like these cost finances and things like that. And then when they meet an app that's essentially a workbook, they're kind of discouraged and they're like, I just don't want to do this at all. And they're back in that same situation again. So my hope in the future is to bring more people with suicidality into face-to-face treatment. This treatment is not going to be the end-all be-all for people with suicidality, but it could be the stepping stone to more comprehensive CBT or DBT treatment.
And can I follow up? I'm just curious. I'm ignorant about how this works. What are the kind of barriers, I don't know, financial, logistical, legal, regulatory, to just making your app like freely available to everyone in the world? Like in other words, you're doing this in the context of a research study. What happens if you just try to make this freely available? Does the FDA say it's a problem, or is it expensive to make it publicly available, or are there other reasons why it would be a bad idea to do so?
No, it's not really expensive, or the FDA would stop you or anything like that. There's a lot of sleep apps out there currently, or mental health apps that are in general out there that aren't regulated, and that's a larger problem. So in fact, putting this out there on the market, with saying this has an evidence base, would bolster the freely available mental health apps for the general population. They're really like, I could put this app on the Apple Store right now. No one will stop me.
Mm-hmm. So why don't you? I'm not saying you should. I'm genuinely just curious because I read papers with apps and various things, not in the sleep area because that's not my area. And then I want to try it, but I can't because, it's published in a paper, but I can't get it unless, authors give it to me or whatever. So why not make it available?
I mean, yeah, like you said, this wouldn't be available because it's not effective. But these other it's probably the cost due to them. It costs money to keep these updated and have an infrastructure. And if you're just one researcher at an institution, it's hard to keep it updated on the iOS system compared to like the VA or something who has a large background and resources for that.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that as well. Having developed an application through my Career Development Award, that I'm thinking about sustainability for the long term. And there's no free apps. Like it's not an app out there that really essentially is free. Like there's somebody sponsoring the ongoing updates and maintenance that you have to have to the application itself and also to the server as well. So I mean, the cost can be kept minimal, and you can, a lot of apps out there are sold at cost, so they might be $1 or $2 to download. With many downloads, that's going to cover your costs. But like for example, every iOS update that comes out, like my developer has to make sure that the app still functions. So it can, like an iOS update just by itself can actually break the app. So you need to always have somebody or some funds that you're pulling from. Not to say that it's a huge cost, and so you can really make that affordable, but there's no such thing as a truly free app.
Gotcha.
Okay, much more to be said about that, but since we're almost at time, I think I want to thank again, Eric, for sharing your work. Thanks so much for going through all that. I want to give you a bit of a preview for next year. So I have a couple of talks lined up. So as I said, we're not meeting in December. January, February, March, and April have lined up some talks. I've done that for a couple of reasons. One is that some of you know I am having my second girl in February. So I will be handing over the torch for a period of time to be determined exactly when I figure out my maternity leave. But I definitely will be facilitating the January meeting, and then February, March, and April. I'm not sure, it may be me, it may be someone else. So in January, we have an assistant professor of health informatics at Columbia University, Nat Benda, who I met through the NIH training institute that I did a couple of years ago. She does work on human factors, human factors research, health information technology, and health literacy and equity. So we'll hear from her. And then Ian Barnett, hopefully I will make it, but we'll see in February. Will be coming to talk about his work in the Penn unit for mobile app sensing. So Eric, if you're still thinking about, doing some sort of app sensing, I think that's a good one for you to attend. I certainly work in that area, and I'd love to be able to be there if I can. And then we have Professor of Computer and Information Science, Lyle Ingar, who came to a couple of meetings. Some of you know, does some really cool work in machine learning, computational linguistics, and computational social science. So we'll hear from him in March. And then the colleague that I mentioned before, Taylor Burke, she's an assistant professor at Harvard / Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a clinical psychologist working in the area of suicide prevention using computer vision. So we'll hear from her in April. And then, as you know, we meet from September until May, so we'll have one more talk before the summer break. So thank you again, Eric, and great to see you all. Have a wonderful rest of your year, and we'll see you in January.